Welcome to Thriving Thoughts, a podcast for women who believe in thriving in any and every circumstance. Every week, we have candid conversations with remarkable women about how they silence the little lies in their minds and overcome their shoulds, coulds, and not enoughs with big truths. I'm your host, Dr. Sherry. Now let's thrive. Hey friends, welcome to episode 8 of Thriving Thoughts, Exposing the Truth with my friend Bethanee Syversen. All right, ladies, this one, it's a sensitive topic. It's all about fighting the horrible dynamics associated with human trafficking and the events that lead up to that, particularly pornography. My friend Bethanee is here. She is an expert, y'all. She's a remarkable woman, by the way. She's an expert, has been working in fighting the human trafficking industry for over a decade. And most recently, she has created and established a nonprofit in the Northeast called Exposed. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about that today. But really, y'all, she gets down into the details about how we as women, you know, the ones who influence people, the ones who have influence over our significant others, our children, the ones who are actually talking about this stuff, y'all, because let's face it, not everybody's talking about it. And it's not one of those topics that we can just sweep under the rug and pretend isn't there. And just fair warning, some of the topics that we are going to be discussing today are sensitive in nature, and so they're probably not yet for the little ears listening in your car. We will leave that up to your judgment. I just needed to put that little plug in there for you. Eventually, as Bethanee talks about, you will need to have some conversations with your children and with your friends who have children. Y'all, this is serious stuff, and some of it is heavy, and some of it may trigger you. And so I just invite you to tune in, listen up, listen to what the expert Bethanee has to share about what's happening in the human trafficking industry, y'all. I learned some things that I was clueless about. I feel like I live under a rock sometimes. But guess what? We can't afford to live under a rock. We have too many valuable humans we are raising, and it's up to us to be acutely aware, as Bethanee is, and as she's going to share with us how we can be acutely aware of the potential pitfalls that await our children. So, hey, tune in, listen up to my friend Bethanee as she exposes the truth. Good morning, Bethanee. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Thriving Thoughts. I am so honored to have you here and so excited to see what the conversation's going to have for us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm also very excited and honored to be asked. So I look forward to the next hour.
Yeah, me too. Well, I was so excited because we got introduced, well, not even like technically introduced. We were connected via a Facebook message, right?
Yes.
By our mutual friend, Michelle Hilliard, who happened to be on episode 1 of this podcast. And she was like, Sherry, you've got to meet Bethanee. You need to hear her story. You need to hear what she's doing. She's got a message for women. And so then you and I got to talk briefly.
Yes.
On the phone, which was fantastic. I was organizing my shoe closet and you were pampering a sick little one and entertaining another one with a board game. I'm like, this woman is superwoman. I can't even manage to, just take care of my shoes. So I can't imagine what your life is like. And I'm sure you're going to share a lot of that with us today. So Bethanee, tell us where you live. Where are you from?
Well, I grew up in Seattle, right outside of Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
So in my heart, Washington State is still my home,
Yeah.
but I haven't lived there for years. I've lived in New Hampshire for the last couple of decades, since 1998.
Oh, wow.
And so New Hampshire is my home, and we've moved around to a few towns here in New Hampshire, but we live in central New Hampshire now. We're an hour to Boston, an hour to the mountains, an hour to Vermont, an hour to Maine, an hour to the ocean. It's incredible.
So I bet fall, which we are on the hinges of, is incredible. What's your favorite thing about the fall season?
Hiking in the mountains.
Oh, yeah.
Because the views from the top, there's nothing like it. It's so spectacular when you see God's tapestry out there painted in a million different fall colors. There's just nothing like it. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It looks like the forest is like on fire just with all the different colors.
Yeah. Like I love it with just all of the pops of color. Now, let me ask you this. Is it different for you? What's different about the topography or the scenery from home versus New Hampshire?
Well, it's interesting. They're very similar.
Hmm.
So, I mean, Washington notoriously is known as this gray, gloomy, cloudy, rainy state.
Right.
But
and Starbucks.
And Starbucks and grunge music.
Right.
But to me, it's not that way at all. The reason why New Hampshire feels like home to me and why I can settle in here so well outside of the extremely cold winters, which Washington State does not have,
right.
Is because in Washington State, I was an hour to the mountains, an hour to the ocean, an hour to the lakes, an hour. It was very similar. We had all of the same outdoor activities that we could do in Washington State, we have here. So from that standpoint, not a ton different. Washington State is obviously a much bigger state, so the traffic is significantly worse, and getting in and out of Seattle is atrocious. But it's beautiful, both states.
Yeah.
I just had a chance to take my husband out to my home state, my stomping grounds. I showed him what I call my mountain, which is Mount Rainier. And we went to Mount St. Helens, and we went to the Olympic National Forest. And, I just got to show him where I grew up and all the places that are so, bring so many fond memories to, from my childhood. And he was blown away by how spectacularly gorgeous Washington State was. So he was really blown away actually by the size of the trees. I hadn't even processed how small the trees are here in New England compared to the size out on the West Coast. And I was like, you're right. I mean, like the trees are, and we're not even just talking about redwoods. We're just talking about trees in general. They're just so much bigger and taller out there.
Isn't that crazy? I think that's, I don't know. I think that's so awesome because I remember I've never been to the Northwest.
Okay.
I've been to, I guess the Midwest, not the Midwest, but the so, California, Arizona, that kind of stuff. But I've never been to the Pacific Northwest, and that is one place I want to go. So thanks for painting a picture for me and whetting my appetite even more for that.
Yes, definitely get there.
Yeah. So what brought you to New Hampshire?
I'm a mama's girl, so I was supposed to go to college in Springfield, Missouri at Evangel Bible College. And through a series of events that happened, I ended up not going there. And the thought of being that far away from my parents. So my dad was really in the military, and that's what made us, that's why we were out in Washington State. But my parents really grew up in Maine. And so when my dad retired from the military, and we were one of those super odd military families that never moved. So I moved to Washington State when I was 3. And then he finally got transferred when I was 16 at the end of my sophomore year of high school. So that summer we moved down to Louisiana, which was culture shock. And we were there for a couple of years. And then when he retired, I was supposed to be in Missouri, and I just did not want to be that far away from my family. I loved them too much. And so anyhow, I ended up going to the University of Maine, and that's where I met my husband, who was an engineer. And so he kind of wanted out of Maine. There aren't a ton of jobs in Maine, especially engineering jobs. And so he started looking for jobs in the Boston and southern New Hampshire region and elsewhere in the country. But he settled on a company here in New Hampshire. And so when we finished college in 98, we moved down here, and we've been here ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great story. What part of Louisiana were you in?
The armpit of Louisiana.
Which is what?
Fort Polk, Leesville.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. So this is funny, Bethanee. Do you know, I actually did some work at Fort Polk.
Yeah.
I flew in, and I used to do applied behavior analysis work with children on the autism spectrum. And I think I was living in Virginia at the time, but I was flying like once a quarter down to Fort Polk to work with some of the military families there. And boy, was that in the middle of nowhere. So when we drove from Washington State to Louisiana, I jokingly had said, oh, wouldn't that, I was going into my junior year of high school, and my sister was in the car still, and my mom and dad and I joked, and I said, oh, wouldn't that be funny if there was a town called Hicks? And
And God, I love the South. I could live in the South. I love it. So this is not like making fun of. So if you have any listeners, I loved my time in Louisiana. It was just very, very different than the Pacific Northwest, though, which was the only thing I ever knew.
Right.
But my point is like seconds later, we passed by a town sign and it said Hicksville, and we all just died laughing. But Louisiana was hard for me. It was hard, even though I have some of my greatest high school friends actually came out of Louisiana, not out of Washington State.
Well, yeah, because you moved like later. You moved for your junior and senior year, right?
Yeah. So in theory, the people I had grown up with since kindergarten should have been like my lifelong, at least high school friends. But no, I've made some of the closest friends I have to this day in high school in Louisiana. So I love it.
Yeah.
But it was just a culture shock. I really, truly did not know that racism still existed.
Yeah.
The Pacific Northwest, especially back in the 90s, was known as the melting pot of America. I don't know if it still is, but certainly when you go back there, it still looks that way. And so I didn't realize that racism still existed. So it was heartbreaking for me to see that not only did the whites still have a lot of issues with the blacks, but Black people also had a lot of race issues with whites.
Right.
And so it was really devastating. But again, I rolled with it and made some really great friends there. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're loving life in New Hampshire and you're a New England girl. I have a brother and his family living in Connecticut. And they love it. But it's so funny to me because it's like here, so I'm in Virginia, and here they'll close school, if it's too cold or icy or snow.
I happen in the snow.
And there they close school if it's too hot.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
They don't really close school here for being too hot.
Or anything.
Maybe that's because it never gets too hot.
Maybe. Yeah. They're like totally equipped for the snow, but not the heat. Anyway. Yeah. So, hey, Bethanee, when you and I talked on the phone, you told me several things that were intriguing. A fun one that I wanted to start off with is when you said there was a day or it was a specific time, and I think maybe your husband was rearranging the study or the library, and then you said, I have my own genre. Can you tell us about that? Tell the listeners about that. That was a fun story.
Yeah. So the whole of that day was that I had always wanted to take some assessment tests, personality tests for myself. My husband got to do them professionally all the time, but I've been a stay-at-home mom. Even though I went to school, I ended up just being not just, but
there you go,
ended
girl.
Up choosing to be a stay-at-home mom. So I didn't have like professional development things that were, like, oh, you should take this test or this test. So anyhow, I decided one Sunday after church to just go home, and I just started taking all these tests, this Myers-Briggs and DISC and several others that our pastor who, he runs a super successful financial business. And so he uses two different models for his employees. They must take them before they hire them on. And so he sent me some of them. And then I took COBOL and some other ones. And so throughout the whole day, I just ended up taking 5 or 6 different tests and reading through the page after page after page of assessments of who I am, my personality, and, all the things that are beautiful and hard about me. And so as I was wrapping up the last one, my husband, who was in the next room over, he was reorganizing our library or the study, but all the books on our shelves. And he said, come here, I just want to show you what I've been working on all day. And I said, okay. So I went in and he said, so, these are all the parenting books. These are all the finance books. These are all the blah, blah, blah. And he said, and this is your shelf. And I said, what do you mean? I have a shelf? He's like, yeah, you have a shelf. So for the listeners, what you'd have to know is that my entire life, I was not a reader, never aspired to be an author, never enjoyed sitting down with a book. I enjoyed the concept of it, but I was never a reader. I didn't grow up in a home where reading was a really big thing. And when my mom read a lot, it just wasn't encouraged for my sister and I to read. So anyhow, I just wasn't a reader. But somewhere in my early to mid 30s, I all of a sudden started reading. I don't know why, but I started reading, and I had amassed a decent amount of books, and my husband had them on these couple of shelves, and he said, yeah, and you have a genre. And I went, what do you mean I have a genre? And I just started crying. Now,
oh my gosh.
I think the crying was tied into the fact that I had just done all these assessment tests of myself that day. And I had learned some really valuable things. Now, this was just, I don't know, like about a year ago. And some of the things I had learned in those assessment tests were that I am fierce, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I am outspoken, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are not the broken pieces of me.
That's right.
I may have some brokenness, but those are not the broken pieces of me. And so the lies that have been in my head, both from my own self-reflection of what I believed others thought of me, and the voices of other people my entire life saying things like I would hear people make comments to my husband with me standing right there, and they'd be like, oh, she must be a lot to handle.
Oh my goodness.
Those are negative voices that I would just hear all the time.
And not even your own, from other people.
Yeah, exactly. But my husband loved those things about me. And so he would defend me in that moment. And he'd say, those are the things that I love about her. That's why I married her. I didn't want a flower on the wall. I wanted a go-getter in life. I wanted somebody who was not afraid to speak her mind and to say her piece, and to go be a mover and a shaker and a world changer. And so he would defend me, but those voices still stuck in my head as, well, I must be broken. There must be something wrong with me that so many people don't like, that I am outspoken or that I am XYZ.
Right.
So when I did all these assessment tests and I started realizing I'm not broken, and then I go into the library and I realize I have a genre, I just broke down and started crying. And he's like, yes, you have a genre. And I do, very much so. Like, overwhelmingly, I love reading historical biographies.
Okay.
And like right now, I'm reading through Amazing Grace, all about William Wilberforce, which is, right in tune with the work that I do for a living. And so anyhow, it's a phenomenal book. I'm loving it, but I've just read so many. And then I've read some modern autobiographies and biographies and stuff like that. But overwhelmingly, that is my genre. It kind of bores me to tears to read, self-help kind of books. Right. I don't know why, but I really struggle through those. But I love biographies. So anyhow. Yeah.
Well, I love that. So, and it's interesting that, so this experience for you was about a year ago, you said?
Yeah, ish.
Yeah. So how did that change your life to begin to see all of the qualities of you as beautiful and intended and needed, as opposed to being broken pieces or being too much?
Yeah. So, because I am that kind of fierce source to be reckoned with kind of personality, I didn't let those things stop me from still doing what I believed I should be doing.
Right.
So I still was homeschooling my kids. I still was fighting for social injustices. I was still passionately doing things with a fierce voice, and I'm envisioning it like, when a cat gets scared, they fluff up their fur, right? Yeah. I kind of feel like that's how I was going about it before, is I'm going to make myself bigger and more fierce because I don't believe these things about myself necessarily, but I believe I'm capable of doing them. I just don't know that I necessarily believe that it should be me that's doing them, because I'm the broken person trying to get it done, Right. But when that day happened, what happened was it gave me permission to move in so much freedom, to say, no, Bethanee, you are here, just like Esther in the Bible, for such a time as this. Yeah. God purposed and planned for your life in all of eternal history for you to be born on March 2nd, 1977,
Yeah.
that you would live this kind of life, that you would have this kind of personality, even though nobody else in your family has this kind of personality.
Right.
It's not like I grew up watching this kind of example. It just is who he created me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to move in so much freedom.
Yeah.
And
confidence.
I live unapologetically now.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I love that. Oh my gosh. If the women listening, I think about so many of us walk around until we're in our 40s.
Yeah.
And that's suddenly when we realize how valuable we are. And it's fascinating. It's not that we walked through life with our heads down and didn't do anything, right?
Yes.
But there is a certain release, that freedom that you're talking about, that for me is a confidence that I can, with 100% assuredness, say that the world needs me.
Yes.
That they need me, not somebody like me. They need me. They need the person I was crafted to be by God long before time began.
Yes. Exactly.
Right. And that's what you're saying. So I just love that. And when you find that and you start to walk in that, man, it's not about being, it's not about being cocky or braggadocious. It's about walking in your purpose and going, yes, you need me. Okay, where am I going to go serve today? Because I'm needed.
Yes. And I have seen God open tremendous doors just in the last year. And I believe that, again, it was almost like a divine, not almost, I believe that it was a divine both awakening and a divine purpose for such a time as this, as in right now.
Okay.
Because I almost wonder if I would have been ready for what I'm about ready to walk into. There's stuff on a national level that I'm about ready to embark on. And I don't know that I would have been ready to handle that in my 30s because then I didn't believe that I was not broken.
Yeah, man, I just got chills when you said, I wouldn't have been ready. There are things as women that we can pray for and pray for and pray for and hope for and long for. And I have asked myself, that is a question that I've started to ask myself like about 3 years ago. I remember I was sitting down and I was hoping for something. I can't even remember what it was right now. Something to do with my career.
Yeah.
And I remember that night I went to sleep and I still didn't have the answer. And I woke up the next morning and my answer to my desire was, if you had that right now, would you be ready for it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the time, my answer was honestly no.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
I've had to have that same exact conversation with myself and with God. And matter of fact, I've even had it with our mutual friend, Michelle, to some extent. And I've had it with a couple of other women that I've gone to like women's conferences with. And I just will say that I've just spent, not years, that's dramatic. Over the course of years, I have had many moments where I have just laid my heart out before God and cried and said, why would you put this so deeply inside of me to not have it come to fruition?
Oh,
and
I know
I'm
that's
only
resonating with people.
Getting older. I'm not getting younger, God. And literally I've heard him speak to my heart and say, you're not ready. When you're ready, watch what I can do if you will only just trust me.
Yes.
And so I did. I had to say, okay, God, when your timing is right, then I'll trust that,
Right. I love that. That's beautiful. Now, hey, you mentioned you are getting ready to step into something.
Yes.
At a national level.
Yes.
Tell us what you're doing.
So, I have been running for the last decade, running and co-running an organization in New Hampshire fighting human trafficking.
Okay. What's the name of that organization?
That one is called New Hampshire Traffic Free Coalition. And then we had adopted twins who are now 4.5 years old. And so they are our number 5 and our number 6.
Okay.
So we have 6 kids. And so when we adopted them, I really felt like I need to step out. I need to back out for a little bit. I need to be present and raise these little guys for some time because they're twins and it was a lot of
Right.
work.
Yeah.
So I did step out for about 4 years. And then I just started back up in December of 2018. And so through that, I started a new organization called Expose.
Okay. Just EXPOSE?
Yep. From a website perspective, it's exposeonline.org though.
Got it.
Expose was already taken. So exposeonline.org it is. And so that one is focusing primarily on combating pornography and all that it is doing to our society, all that it is doing to our children, and the ramifications that we're seeing within our homes and within our marriages, even our Christian marriages, our Christian churches.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It is destroying the fabric of our society because of what it is doing on a neurological level. It is dopamine filling. It is, when they do scans of people doing cocaine and people watching pornography, it has very similar neurological reactions. And so we're just seeing,
and it makes you want to do it again.
It makes you want to do it again and again and again. And so what we're seeing is higher levels of suicide, higher levels of child on child sexual abuse, higher levels of, sexual assault against women and sexual assault against the LGBT community. They are at very high risk of being sexually exploited. We're seeing higher levels of exploitation and assault and rape and abuse among women. And people would say in the porn industry, many of these women that are in the porn industry, whether they walked into it not knowing what they were necessarily getting into, or whether they were straight out trafficked into that situation, which both cases happen, no matter what scenario the initial entry is, every woman coming out of that will say, I was sexually assaulted, I was raped, I was abused, I was given drugs to cope with all of the emotional trauma of what I do.
Lord
and
Jesus.
So some of the national level stuff is happening in those arenas.
So how do you, I mean, this is such a massive, massive issue. I mean, I don't even know, you probably know, what's the dollar amount spent in the pornography industry?
Oh gosh, it's million. I think it's billions. Yeah. It's, and I should know that number right off the top of my head. There's one organization that's one of the top 3 in the world. It's called MindGeek. MindGeek, just on, I think it's their top 3 or top 5 platforms. Their revenue is something like $150 billion a year. It's staggering, the numbers. Excuse me. So, and that's just MindGeek. That is just on their top, again, the numbers are fuzzy for me.
No, that's
3
fine.
to 5 of their top platforms. So one of their platforms is Pornhub, right? If you have any teens in the house, any adult, people have heard of Pornhub. It's crazy. Yeah.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that about having kids or anybody in the house. So who are the most vulnerable people to being exposed to pornography and becoming basically addicted to pornography?
Oh gosh. From purely from a research and medical perspective, I don't know that. I don't know the answer on if there is a specific group, because statistically, what we know right now, and so what I'm saying is there may be studies out there that can narrow it down to a single group. Okay. What I'm saying is statistically across those of us fighting this in this industry, it is not just a single group. It is children, because they are being given devices at younger and younger ages, and parents are not tuned in to what their children are doing on these devices. And parents are even, well, my kid only has this app and this app. but do they understand that those apps
That's right.
have, I'm losing the words, like
ads?
No, well, yeah, ads,
Pop-ups?
but no, the ability to communicate with strangers.
Yes.
Well, I'm just blanking on that word. But the ability to communicate with people outside of just that app.
Right.
So if you don't shut that down and you don't, and you allow your child to hear conversations or to be invited into a conversation, you have 3 and 4 and 5 and 6-year-old children that are being asked and groomed to send me a picture of you in your underwear, send me a picture of put the camera down in your pants, all kinds of things that are just terrifying. And unless a parent, and it happens, overhears this conversation because the volume is on high or it's on speaker, then parents don't know that this kind of stuff is happening. But we also know that within college campuses, within high school campuses, a big conversation that is happening right now is many schools have their children bused together. So elementary school kids are on the same bus as middle school kids.
As kindergartners.
As kindergartners and high schoolers.
Yep.
And so what's happening is we have these older kids who just think that pornography is funny.
Yeah.
And so they're showing it to the kindergartners and the first graders. This is exploitation of these children.
Yeah.
This is the grooming of an entire next generation of children to think that there is nothing wrong with what is being seen. Right. So there's wonderful organizations out there. Protect Young Minds by Kristen Johnson. She writes phenomenal books. There are 2 really great books that are geared towards educating children at very young ages. So there's a junior book, and then there's like the non-junior book. They have the same name, I believe. But basically, the junior book is for ages like 3 to 6 or 3 to 7. And it starts out, I mean, it sounds like hard conversations, but the problem is, do you want to not have that hard conversation with your child and let some child on a school bus introduce them to sexuality and all that kind of stuff? Or do you want to be ahead of that, 3 or 10 steps ahead of that, and say, I'm going to have hard conversations with my 3-year-old, even though I never thought I would have to, or my 6-year-old, even though I never thought I'd have to, because this is going to pave the ground for me being a safe spot for them to come to, and for me to be a person that they say, you know what, I saw this on the bus, instead of living in shame and then seeking that out in the future, because our biological responses are to still be intrigued by that stuff. It is our biological reaction is still that is going to feel good. Our mental reaction is, this is not good. This is not right.
This is not right. That's that conscience, the Holy Spirit that is speaking to everybody. Yes, absolutely.
And so these books are phenomenal in naming parts. There's a horrible story out of, I think it was out of Utah, of an FBI agent that was arresting this man because this 3-year-old little girl would go home to her mother and father and say, oh, Grandpa liked to eat my cookies. Well, they had never taught her the appropriate language for her vagina.
And
it wasn't until she was using a baby wipe on her dolly and saying, oh, I'm going to wipe her cookies, that the mom and dad realized what the grandfather was doing. So this is really heavy for this conversation for today.
No, it's exactly what somebody needs to hear, because, I'm thinking about that. Like this is a conversation. This is a topic that we used to have about how do we talk to our kids about drugs and alcohol, right?
Yes.
Now this has evolved. People are more comfortable with that. But at the time, Bethanee, people were not comfortable talking about that.
No.
It was taboo. Like, if I talk about it, then it's going to make them more interested in it. Or, there's that kind of a lie.
That's exactly it. If I talk about it, then they're going to go exploring it. Well, guess what? If you aren't talking about it,
that's right.
Somebody else is. Our media is talking to them. Kids are so hypersexualized now. You see little tiny babies, 1, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, and they're wearing these tiny little bikinis on the beach. And what we know for a fact, because of FBI stings and because of pornography, child pornography stings and things like that, that some people, perpetrators and perverts, are sitting on our public beaches.
Yes, they are
and
there.
they're taking pictures of innocent babies and children in compromising poses, and they are uploading these to pedophile websites.
Right.
We know this stuff is happening, but our parents seem to be living in this social media world where they want to post everything about their children. You will not find a single picture of my children on any of my social media because I want to protect their innocence. I want to protect my children. Now, on my personal website, I do have a few pictures because it pertains to my book, and I made sure that the pictures are, not compromising poses and stuff like that. Those are the only pictures you'll find of my children on any platform, though. Well, because and now I'm protecting them.
And you, okay, yes. And for the women listening, what we are, this conversation is not to rest in judgment over your decisions about social media or anything like that. But what I hear you saying, Bethanee, is, well, one, you are acutely aware because you've been in the human trafficking industry, because you've researched all of this stuff. You've lived it. You've worked with these nonprofits. You've created one.
I've worked with survivors who tell me their stories, horrible stories.
Right. So you are acutely aware. And when you are acutely aware of something, when something is in your personal space like that, your measures that you take to protect your children, like every mother desires to protect her children, become vastly different because you are just that much more aware. Yes. And so I've got a question for you on that. What would you say to a mom who says, I know my kid and I know I don't need to worry about that with them? What would you say to a mom?
Well, I am acutely aware.
Yes, you are.
And I have 6 children, and one of them is a teenage boy. And in 8th grade, as a homeschooling mom, a homeschooling Christian mom, who has been for the last decade working in this industry and fighting against it, discovered that my homeschooled, innocent 8th grade son was looking at pornography on our computer when he was supposed to be doing math.
Yeah.
And I walked past the computer, and the Lord just spoke to me and said, go check that computer. I'm not super tech savvy, but my husband's a computer engineer, and this is what he does for a living.
Right.
And so he hacked through that computer like nobody's business and was able to find, we have filters, we have blocks, we have all kinds of stuff on our systems to make sure that our children are protected and safe. And still,
yeah,
our son found a loophole. I don't even know that he was looking for the loophole. He may have been, but I don't think that he was. I just think that he found a loophole. I don't even know that he knew we had filters or blockers and all these things on our system. But what he found was that through YouTube, my husband, and I was unaware of this, my husband allowed him to have a YouTube gaming channel, and which I totally disagreed with, but through that YouTube gaming channel where he was just able to watch videos on how to win the next level of a particular game, you could search for other videos. And so he searched sexy, and that brought up all kinds of pornographic videos.
Well, and you don't even have to, it doesn't even have to be that explicit. I don't know about you, Bethanee, but have you ever gone to Google Images and just searched something that was absolutely benign?
Yes.
And then you see some nude picture come up.
Yeah. Well, I have a funny story. It's horrifying and funny, but what is the green sporting goods store that everybody likes to go to? I'm assuming it's nationwide.
Oh gosh.
It's Dick's Sporting Goods.
Oh, Dick's, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so, don't search Dick's.
Right. So what did I do? I went to Dicks.com.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's what we all call it. We're like, hey, we're going to Dick's, to get a new soccer ball or some more cleats. And so now this was years before I was working in this industry, but I Google Dicks.com, and that did not
go well, did it?
It did not go well. But again, I thought, what if that had been my child?
That's right. That's right.
That for me, that was so innocent. I always just say, I'm gonna run to Dick's and get some more cleats. And I Googled that, and it was so innocent. My mother was looking for a new house, my parents, and my mom's typed in one of the national, real estate agencies like Century 21 or, one of the big ones. And she didn't add an S or she did add an S. I forget what it was, but just that difference of leaving off the S or adding the S brought up, the porn industry had purchased that domain name so that people would accidentally go to it.
That's the sort of thing that makes me have righteous anger. Yeah.
Me
because too. It's, man, the enemy of deception is hard at work. Let me trip you up wherever I can. Now, yes, I get very angry about that. And I am so grateful. And I hope it's okay with you that we spend our entire time talking about this, because I think it's critical that the women listening, it doesn't even have to be your own kid. It could be your niece, your nephew. It could be a kid that you work with in school. It could be a friend's child. It could be a friend. It could be a parent. It could be an adult struggling with this. And so I think that there's huge value in what you're doing. My question, I want to go back a little bit, Bethanee. How did this become a passionate pursuit for you?
So about a decade ago, we live in a teeny little town, 2,500 people, and we lived on a quiet cul-de-sac street with 9 houses. And we, one day in July, the FBI and 5 local police departments and the SWAT team all swarmed our street. It was crazy.
Your tiny, quiet cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Mad chaos. The whole street was shut down. It was crazy. We ended up discovering that the house directly across the street from us, that man, he was not married to the woman that was living there, but they built that house together. She had 3 children from a prior relationship.
Okay.
And one of the children was 11. And so she was the middle. And then, there's an older and a younger one. And that from the age of 11 until 13, at 11, he started raping and molesting her at night when the mother was away working 3rd shift as a nurse. So here she was diligently working, providing for her children and her family. And he started doing this at night while she was away. And so kind of like drugs, that was no longer sufficient for him. So he started recording himself doing these things to her and uploading it to pedophile websites. And from there, he, over the course of 2.5 years, he ended up driving her and trafficking her into our state's capital. And there happened to be at that time what was known as like a local sex park, and where people, usually adults, would just hook up. They would go and kind of tap their brakes for some, I'm a man seeking a man, I'm a woman seeking a man, whatever. And
oh my goodness,
this completely, one night stand kind of hookups.
I live under a rock. I've never heard of
and
that.
This is very common. This stuff happens throughout the U.S. everywhere. And so this other man was there, and he came over to the window to engage in a sexual act with the girl. But, through the brake taps or whatever, didn't realize her age. And he got there and he played it really cool, which I think is really phenomenal what this man did, because he's there already in a sketchy situation doing sketchy things that are not normal.
Right.
But he had a conscience in that moment and he played it cool. And he said to the guy, my neighbor, he said, yeah, she's a little bit too young for me. I like my girls a little bit older. And he walked away and got in his car and left and immediately called the FBI.
Wow. So
that's how he ended up getting caught. So for 2.5 years, he was trafficking, sexually assaulting, raping this little girl. And when I found out what happened, I was so broken. I'm a runner, and I would run past them, her and her sisters, at the end of their driveway as they waited for the bus every morning. And as I would wave, they would just wave back and smile. And I had no idea of the horrors that little girl was going through. And I just sat in my home for weeks afterwards, completely shattered, broken, wondering, how did I miss that? How could have I saved that little girl? And, even all the work that I've done and all the education I've gained in the last decade, there's nothing I could have done or known by just those interactions. We were not friendly with them. We didn't hang out with them. Certainly there are things that I found out through other neighbors who were friendly with them that had anybody been aware of some of the signs to look for, which is some of the trainings that I do now, then people may have been able to see some red flags. But there was no way I could have. But I did vow in that moment that I would do whatever I could for the rest of my life to fight for children, to fight for their innocence, to fight for their sexuality, to fight for protection, to fight for stricter laws, against perpetrators who do these things to children. So on a state level, I'm at the Capitol on a regular basis, fighting bills and working with legislators who are writing bills to increase penalties against perpetrators, and to make sure currently in the state of New Hampshire, as well as 5 other states in our country, we're trying to legalize and fully decriminalize prostitution. That is horrible on every single level. It is so horrible. And there's a pro-prostitution group flying out to all these states, fighting against these, fighting in favor of these bills, to have these bills passed in multiple states. But what we can see from Las Vegas is it's a disaster. I mean, there's so many trafficking cases and so much sexual trauma and rape and abuse out of Las Vegas. And we're trying, there are states trying to legalize this in the US. So yeah, that's what got me started. And I will fight until I die, or until God tells me otherwise.
Yeah, I thank you so much. What incredible work. That is work that God did not create me for. There are certain things, it's interesting when you talk to people and they're like, man, I really have a passion for this. And that is something that I could not sleep at night. Probably knowing as much as, I could probably not sleep at night, honestly. But I feel like our society as a whole, in its false, so this is like a lie, in its false pretense of giving people autonomy, of giving people independence, of giving people freedom to do things, all the way now to the right to die and, things like this. Like we are creating a space where it is okay and acceptable for people to destroy themselves, and for people to destroy themselves who honestly, in many cases, never had a choice.
Yes.
That were drug into that were exposed to that became their life course. And we're making that okay. It's just, it's quite angering.
Yeah, it is. And there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on based on that. And I want to go back to a question that you asked me earlier. And I have a horrible memory, so I'm probably going to forget one of these two.
Okay. All right.
But going back, you had asked me who's at highest risk.
Yeah.
From a pornography standpoint, the data, I don't know. That's what I was saying. I don't know that there's data out there saying the one group is at higher risk for becoming addicted to pornography. From a trafficking perspective, that is absolutely not true. We know categorically that there is a group of people that are at much higher risk, and that is children, and in particular, foster care children that are in and out of the foster care system.
Wow.
So we know this because traffickers will prey on people that are already insecure, people that are already broken.
Yeah.
And even if those children in foster care don't have sexual trauma in their past, which many of them do, I think it's something like 60% of all foster care children have been sexually assaulted or sexually abused in some way. But obviously that sets up an entire pattern of, exploitation risks for those children. Right. And we know that traffickers and pimps will hang outside of youth prisons and youth group homes, so that when kids get released or when kids run away from the foster care group homes, they are there. They're waiting in the wings. They're waiting to just swoop in and say, Do you need a place to sleep tonight? Come back to my place. I've got a bed. I'll feed you. I'll take care of you. And they go through this whole grooming process of making them feel like nobody in the world loves you.
Taken care of.
I love you, and I'm going to take care of you.
Yep.
I will always have your back. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to clothe you. I'll get your nails done. I'll take care of you. I won't let anybody touch you. And then a month, 2 months later, and sometimes not even, sometimes it's a week later, they're beating them, and those kids are out on the street, and they are, running tricks for these pimps, and their tiny little bodies are being exploited day after day after day, night after night. Some stories are that kids are still actively in school, and they are woken up in the middle of the night out of their own houses, and but that's not a foster care situation necessarily, but. Yeah, so foster care children are at huge risk. I'm actually running for the entire state of New Hampshire this Saturday, an entire day-long event for foster care for parents who are foster parents.
Okay.
And training them on, so there'll be 3 sessions: safe social media usage, pornography, and how your foster kiddos are at high risk for being groomed through the use of pornography, and then also human trafficking, how children are at high risk for being trafficked because of their foster care status, because of their abuse and trauma from their background. Again, it could even just be physical abuse, but that physical abuse does,
but it doesn't even have to be abuse, right, Bethanee? I mean, look at this from a psychological perspective. When you are separated from your primary care connection,
right?
When that bond either never has the opportunity to form, or it's formed in such a dysfunctional way,
right?
You're set up for that, period.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you probably an impossible question, but I want to give something to the listeners that they could take and use right now. So if you could maybe give the women listening 2 practical tools that they can use to protect their children. I don't care what that is, if it's a social media tip, if it's a practical daily tip. And then 2, the second part of that, can you give our women listening a couple of phrases or things to talk about with their kids or with kids that they know that they just don't know how to say it? So maybe a couple of tips on how to protect and a couple of tips on how to talk.
Thank you for that recap, because I have a bad memory.
Well, I also like wax long. So yeah.
So a couple of tips on how to protect. I would say there's a kind of this movement across America that's starting, and it's again, it goes back to my horrible memory. It's something like it's like a hashtag, not until 16 or something like that.
Okay.
So basically, holding off on giving cell phones until 16.
Yeah.
Let those brains develop a little bit more. The thing that we hear from parents so often is, and again, this isn't about shaming parents. It's just educating, because my heart is so broken about what happened to my neighbor. I feel like I'm in this desperate race to save every child from, even if they're never exploited and never trafficked, but they find pornography and they go down this horrible path of porn addiction. But what comes from that is tremendous amount of shame. And we know there's all kinds of psychological things that happen with porn addiction and what that does to the psyche of a child. Yeah. So maybe consider holding off on those smartphones, on tablets that are connected to the internet until 16. I have an almost 19-year-old son. I will tell you that even at 16, that's not going to solve all your problems, because you can give it to them at 16. And if you don't have other things, if you haven't started the conversation with them about what is pornography, here are the risks, here's what's happening behind the cameras to these women. If you're not already engaging in these conversations and you just hand them social media and smartphones at 16, it's going to be a world of hurt. There's going to be so much hurt and devastation when you discover all the stuff that your child
That's
has
right.
been introduced to. And particularly, I think, within Christian homes where we have a different set of standards for and hopes and dreams for our kids that.
But I think we also have a false sense of security because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that would be one thing. And another thing, oh gosh, just two is hard because again, I would go back to social media, and I would say, because there's things I would want, another tip I'd want to give about trafficking, but the reality is that since Backpage.com has been taken down, a lot of trafficking is now happening through social media. So through Instagram, overwhelmingly, when we get the data from FBI agents and survivor specialists, agents, and we talk to them and we say, how are kids getting into being trafficked now? Overwhelmingly, it is Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, I'm missing some others, but through social media, they are finding these kids who have their accounts wide open, and now that their accounts are wide open and they're posting things. Yeah. So this weekend during this foster care training, I invited a detective from New Hampshire to join me, and he is coming. He does a phenomenal presentation, and his is so powerful because he is an FBI agent working in ICAC, the Internet Crimes Against Children. This is what he does day in, day out. He is finding these children and finding the perpetrators. And so he goes through to parents and to children at these conferences exactly how perpetrators find them. And he uses this real life example that he had to deal with. And it was a young boy, teenage boy. And he said his Instagram account was completely wide open. And he said something like, he was talking to his friend, responding to his friend. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like something like, oh, I can't go tomorrow because I have to go to my little brother's baseball game. And after that, my sister has dance. And then we're going to go to, and he listed the name of an amusement park that they was going to go to. Right. So the detective was able to show all these parents exactly how this perpetrator was able to find this young boy. They were like, okay, we know he has younger siblings. Oh, and he named the park where the baseball games was going to be at. So who probably lived near here because he's playing at this park. Right. We know that he has a sister, and he gave some other details. We know his general age because he said this. Now I know on Saturday he's going to be at this amusement park. And so the perpetrator went to that amusement park and waited for him and stalked him. But then the detective goes through how he didn't try to kidnap him there. He didn't try to do anything to him there because he knew, but now he had a visual. Okay, now I know what this kid looks like. And now I know what his little siblings look like. I know what his family looks like. And then he followed the car home. Now I know exactly where the kid lives. And from there, this perpetrator was able to gain access into this family's life. And that kid suffered a ton of trauma. Right. So locking down your social media for your kids, making sure that their accounts are set to private, making sure they are not accepting friend requests from people that they don't know. If you're going to give social media access to children, protect them, put filters, use Bark, use Custodio, use K9, use an open DNS system, use these things that are out there, which none of them are perfect, but they're all at least doing something to help protect your children.
Yes. Wow. So Bethanee, I don't know what to do. We're going to have you back for part 2 because we are like out of time, but do this for me before we go, because I know there's a lot of women listening who you've probably hit a spark with that may have an equal passion or desire, to fight this huge battle that you are fighting. How can they lock arms with you? How can they walk alongside you and do some work with you?
So, through my organization, I'm one person. My friend does it with me, but she's still heavily tied to New Hampshire Traffic Free. Okay. We don't have the funds to at this time to we're a small organization in New Hampshire, but so from that perspective, I don't have funds to hire anybody. But if people want to volunteer their time, even from other states, there are certainly things like Michelle is really good at doing digital work for me. And so she's creating a trifold flyer for me. Okay. If somebody is really good with social media, I would love somebody that's super active on social media and super present and give you admin privileges to our social media, and then keep our social media active. Things like that. Certainly within your own state, there are tons of stuff that you can do. And the number one thing I would say that is super, super practical and can make a huge difference is get involved in your politics. It does not mean you have to be political. It just means find the group in your state that is watching some of these more conservative bills, things like protecting children and family, and go to your state's capital and fight, be present. I was just in Concord, our state capital, last week, fighting a bill we've been fighting for 3 sessions now to increase the penalty for people who purchase minors for sex. Why we are in our 3rd session trying to defend this bill is beyond me, and it is beyond the representative who wrote the bill. But yeah, get involved on a legislative level in your state. It's super easy and super practical and really, really helpful.
Awesome. Bethanee, thank you so much. How else can people follow you or get in touch with you if they just want to watch what you're doing? Are you on social media?
So I am. So I am on Facebook. I will never accept people I don't know. So from the perspective of my personal Facebook account, I won't accept anybody that I don't know.
Sure.
But I do have one because I'm also an author. I've written a book, which we didn't get a chance to talk to at all today about.
I know.
So I have a website, Bethanee, Bethanee, and then R, and then Syversen, which is a terribly long and hard last name. S as in Sam, Y, V as in Victor, E, R, S, E, N as in Nancy. So BethaneeRSyversen.com. Okay. And from there, I have a contact page. I have information about my book, information about my 2 organizations, some small information about celiac disease. So all kinds of stuff. You can find me on there.
Awesome. We will be sure to include that in the show notes. And Bethanee, one of the things that I ask every podcast guest is to leave our listeners with one piece of truth that you want them to remember when this podcast episode ends.
I love Esther. So I would say, own who you are and know that for such a time as this, you were created. Whatever those voices are inside your head that are the lies from the enemy, get them out. Do whatever you need to do to start believing that you were created for 2019 and for your future to make an impact on a global scale, on an independent, town scale, whatever it is. God has purposed you for something. Otherwise, you would not be here.
That's right. So, yes, you are not done.
Such a time as this.
Woke up with breath in your lungs.
That's
for
right.
Such a time as this. Bethanee, thank you so much for all of your wisdom. We are going to have you back for part 2 because we need more of this. This is an important topic. And women, in my opinion, not because men aren't, but women are the ones who are talking to their husbands. They're the ones talking to their children. They're the ones talking to their friends in the community. So they need to hear more about this. So thank you for shedding light on it. And thanks so much for being my guest today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right, girl. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
As always, I'm humbled you chose to join me this week for Thriving Thoughts. It's women like you who listen, subscribe, and give us thoughtful reviews that allow our message of thriving in any and every circumstance to reach even more women who need a healthy dose of truth speaking. I'm Dr. Sherry, and I'm grateful to be your Thriving Thoughts host, where we're shifting perspectives and speaking life to you so you can thrive. Be sure to tune in next week and share this episode with a friend. Until then, remember, overcome your little lies with big truths.